I want to show you kind of an out of the box way to use panos, or at least that's the way I used it in this particular situation a few years ago. And I think you'll like it. And on top of that, I'm also going to use Topaz Photo AI because for some reason, I don't remember why, but I had my ISO jacked up a little high, enough to generate noise in the photo. And I think, I don't know that I've ever done a pano where I stitched together and then use noise reduction. It's an interesting workflow. I think it's going to be super helpful. But before we jump in, first, let me introduce myself. If you're new to this channel, welcome. My name is Brian. I'm a photographer that helps photographers like you get better looking photos with apps like Lightroom and Photoshop and out of the third-party apps like Topaz Photo AI, which again, we'll be using here. So let's jump into Lightroom and I will tell you what we're going to do. Here you can see I've got these 4 images that I took at Arches National Park. This is balanced rock. And again, usually when you think about panos, you're thinking about these ultra wide shots. However, I remember when I took this shot, it was super windy and I didn't want to take my lens. Basically, I had the 40mm on and I didn't want to swap the lens because I remember, as you can see in these photos, you're kind of in a desert and there's sand blowing everywhere. And I just was not in the mood to deal with that. I've done it before. It's fine. But here's the thing. I had a solution. Even with the 40mm lens, I was able to get these images here. And I knew that I would be able to combine them together in post to make one single image that has everything that I wanted in it. So if we look at these images here, you can see as I kind of pan from left to right, this is the shot. Now I wanted a wider lens. That's what I originally wanted to do, was to put on a wider lens, maybe my 16-35 or my 18mm lens. But again, it was a combination of not wanting to deal with exposing the camera sensor to the elements because again, it was super windy. Also, it was right around golden hour where the sun was, I mean, it was almost past golden hour. The sun was pretty much getting ready to set. You can see the time it was taken at just almost 7 p.m. And I wanted that beautiful glow. Now I must have had a circular polarizer on because I don't know why the images were so dark. It had to have a filter on and I must have not taken it off. And then you can see the exposure settings, f13 at 1/80th. Same exposure settings for all 4 images. That's very important when you're stitching or when you're taking photos to stitch for pano. You want your exposure, your shutter speed, your aperture, and ideally your ISO to be the same. Now here's the thing, speaking of ISO, I was at ISO 320 for all 4 of these photos. And if you zoom in, you can see that there is noise, especially in the sky. Noise doesn't always bother me as much when there's textured stuff here because it kind of all blends in. However, you know, when push comes to shove, I'd rather not have any noise. But in flat areas like sky, noise bothers me a lot and it's just something I want to remove. So this is how I'm going to use pano stitching and Topaz Photo AI together to essentially get, you know, an image that I can start editing. The first thing I'm going to do here is because I know I'm going to go to Topaz Photo AI and I might end up using the sharpen AI model in addition to definitely noise reduction. I don't want any sharpening applied to the image here. And by default, Lightroom will do that. As you can see here, nothing has been applied to the photo. So all I'm going to do here is take the amount slider for sharpening and bring it to 0. I'm going to take this image, shift click the rest of the images here, go to sync settings. We're going to check none. And the only thing that I'm going to sync is sharpening. Then I'll click on synchronize. And what that does is it will synchronize just that one setting. Everything else is untouched, but you can see how across each image here, sharpening is 0. So that's all I'm going to do. Now it's time to stitch. And this really couldn't be easier. As you can see in these images here, I did as good of a job as I could of overlapping them by about 20-ish%. Listen, depending on who you listen to or, you know, which kind of photographer you want to learn from, you'll hear differing percentages of overlap. 20, 25% in my experience has been more than enough. So All you need to do here is take the images that you want to stitch together. In this case here, it's these four. I'm going to right click. We'll go to photo merge, and then we'll go to panorama. Now, there are a few things that we can do here for our pano. The first thing that I typically do is I compare fill edges and auto crop. So what auto crop will do is it will just crop in so that you only see actual pixels. You don't see any of this white stuff here. You can also click on fill edges. And what that will do is use content aware fill to fill in those edges basically without having to crop in. So if maintaining the original pixel count and aspect ratio is super important to you, this might be a good option. However, for me, it's okay because we're going to be cropping in anyway. So auto crop is fine. I'm even going to be cropping in more than this. But the other more important thing to pay attention to are these three options, these projections. I don't really ever work with cylindrical. By default, spherical will be the option that is selected. And you can see here, it does a good job of stitching the images together, but it's only until you put it in perspective. And I don't even mean perspective, this option, but in perspective when you compare other projection modes. So we could click on cylindrical. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like I said here, it's just terrible. I don't like it. It does have its uses, but I've never found a case for it for myself. Perspective is the one that I really like. And here where we compare the two, so take a look at this rock here and look at balanced rock over here. If you click between the two, you see how it kind of takes on, it does take on a spherical look, which is not what I'm going for. I kind of want the perspective look, which basically honors as best as it can the original perspective of the image. Everything looks a little bit more geometrically correct. That's a hard word to say. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do auto settings yet because we're not ready for that. I'm going to go ahead and click merge, and that's going to bring us back into Lightroom. And I did not click on the stack image. So what's going to happen is a fifth image will pop up over here once this is done. And there it is right here. Now, here, the image, this is our stitched image. Everything looks great. And I mentioned how the first thing I want to do is crop, and that's the only thing I'm going to do. And I'll explain why in a minute. So I'm going to press R. You can see here with the perspective shift, you notice how the out of bound areas look a little bit differently than the spherical option. And that's just because it was adjusting the way it stitches. So really quickly, I want to crop in partly because I want to get closer to the rock, but also I don't want this little shrub here and this sand here with my tripod being the shadow of my tripod being shown there. I just don't want to deal with. I could clone it out, but honestly, I do want to get closer. So I'm going to press R to go to crop, and making sure that we are locked for our aspect ratio over here. I'm just going to drag from the bottom left and bring it in. So basically, right around here, and then reposition the composition so that kind of the left third is where balanced rock is. And that to me looks great. I might actually bring it to the right a little bit more, get a little bit more of the tree here. Now, I mentioned how cropping is the only thing I'm going to do. The reason for that is now I want to get rid of noise. That's typically the first thing that I want to do. If I am working with a particular raw file, or in this case, this is a DNG file, I didn't mention that maybe, but when you do either an HDR merge or a pano merge, the resulting image will be a DNG file. And so you can see that here, there's our DNG. Now, I do want to get the noise reduction done early in the workflow, not later. So you can actually send raw or DNG, which is Adobe's raw format, files from Lightroom to Topaz Photo AI. I actually have a video on all of that. I'll put a card here, and then I'll also put a card at the very end of the video for you to check that out. But now's the time to do that. And the reason why I'm not doing any other edits is because the workflow that I'm going to show you to send a DNG to Topaz Photo AI, when you do that, it won't send any of the edits because the edits are typically stored in metadata, and Topaz Photo AI will not read that information. So you're going to you'll see what I mean in a second. Rather than talk to you, let me show you. So again, here's our image. And really quickly, let me press R so I can show you, remember this whole entire blob of a shape here. To get it from Lightroom to Topaz Photo AI, first, actually, again, just to reiterate here, you can see how it is noisy. It's not super noisy, but it's noisy enough that it bothers me. Now, there are two ways that you can get your image to Topaz Photo AI. If you want to go the raw workflow that I was talking about, you would go to File, Plugin Extras, and then select Process with Topaz Photo AI. If you want to make your edits, let's say you're like, you know what? I want to do noise reduction at the end. I don't care. I want to make my edits first. You can do that. Make all your edits in Lightroom. And then what you'll do is you can right click on your image, go to Edit In, and then select Topaz Photo AI. The key difference is that one, you will be sending either a JPEG or a TIFF file over or a PNG. And all of that information will be baked into kind of a lossy compressed format. With the raw workflow, you are sending the actual pixel data, in this case here to DNG. But in my experience, I've found that for noise reduction, the raw workflow, if you have access to the raw file, yields much better results. So it's up to you. I am not going to go this route. I'm going to start with noise reduction first. So again, File, Plugin Extras, Process with Topaz Photo AI. In this case here, I'm going to edit a copy as opposed to overwriting the image because I want to compare them. So I'll click on this and we will launch the app. Okay, so now we are in Topaz Photo AI. And remember, I told you to remember the blob shape of the pano. That's what we see here. It's the exact same thing. Because I told you, Topaz Photo AI will not look at the metadata of the photo. Not only are your edits stored in there, but the crop information is stored in there as well. So that's why you see the full image here. And it's just kind of something you have to be prepared with. You know, if you didn't know that this was going to happen, it might freak you out. But don't worry. Everything will be fine once we get back to Lightroom. I promise you. So you can see in autopilot that it detected the subject, which are just the two rocks, which is interesting. And I'll touch on that in a minute. But more importantly, right below, it says removing medium image noise. So I'm going to zoom in to like 200% here. And you can see once we go to process how it does just a really nice job of removing that noise in the sky. If you want, like I'm going to do, I'm going to increase the strength of that, even though, you know, it doesn't need it. I just kind of want a little bit more noise reduction. You don't have to take Autopilot's recommendations. It's just kind of getting you to a good starting point. That's all it is. It's guidance. It's a recommendation. You can always adjust it however you want. But the other thing that I want to do is see how the sharpen model works. So let me move the focus box here. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that sharpening is applied only to the foreground. Actually, before we do that, let's zoom to fit. I mentioned how this subject detection only detected the two rocks. We can actually refine that and tell it that this is a landscape photo to adjust its auto subject detection. And to do that, we'll click on refine here. And then we're going to click on the landscape preset over here. And now you can see that the auto detected subject is more accurate. It did get, for some reason, it selected the kind of blob area out here. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it because we will take care of that in post when we get back to Lightroom. You don't have to use the masking brush here. All I wanted to do was change the subject detection profile so that it made a better selection. Now I can click done, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in back to 200%, put the focus box around here just to review what's going on. And I'm going to enable sharpen here and increase that strength of sharpening. You can see how it does a really nice job of adding detail where we want it. It's not adding detail to the sky. That's actually an important point that I should make, is that sharpening, when you have this subject only option over here enabled, sharpening will only be applied to that mask here. It's not being applied to the sky, which is super important. But you can see here, if I click and let go, you see how that detail just kind of snaps into place, which to me is very important for this kind of this is a texture rich environment. There's a lot of just cracks and you know, facets that I want to show off. So I think that the sharpened model in this case does a really nice job. And again, it also gets rid of that noise in the sky here. which is ultimately the reason why I sent the image to Topaz Photo AI. And so I am done with Topaz Photo AI now, and I want to go back to Lightroom. So all I need to do is click on this button right here. And you can see now, this is the original stitched photo. This is the image that was returned back from Topaz Photo AI. And you can see how it doesn't have any of the metadata, which means that you are seeing the original full stitched image. So how do we fix that? It's actually really simple. That's why I told you, don't worry about it. Select your original image, the one that we already cropped, then select the second image from Topaz Photo AI. Then let's click on sync settings, check none. And then we're going to select this crop checkbox and click synchronize. Now we have the same exact crop, the same composition between the two photos. Now you may notice, let's just kind of compare really quickly. You might notice that the color profile is a little different. The blues here look a little bit more blue. This looks a little bit more faded. That could be because of, like I mentioned, the color profile. So one of the things I typically do when I get images back from Topaz Photo AI, I'll take the DNG here and under develop, I'm just going to change my white balance from white balance of custom to as shot. Now, if we compare the two, let's see how it looks. They look more similar. It's not going to be totally perfect because Topaz Photo AI has its own raw processor. And so there are some things that are different. But for the most part, this is fine for me. The key here is if I zoom in, you can see how the sky just looks a lot better. You can see all the noise here, but more importantly, you can also now see a lot more detail in the rock. And so that to me is worth it. You know, even if the color is slightly off here, I'm not concerned about it. Now, though, we are ready to actually stylize the photo. And so this is totally subjective, however you want to do this. What I'll do is I'll go to the develop module here and we can start working. First things first is I'm going to open up the exposure. And this is going to require a little bit of kind of finesse. You see, if I bring the white point out too much, it kind of gets a bit too hot in the highlights. So I don't need that, but I will open up the highlights and the shadows a little bit. Let's bring the white point. So this is always kind of like a ballet here. And then we can go ahead with the exposure. And what I'm looking for is just kind of a nice, even exposure, nothing crazy. Might even drop the white point. It's a bit too hot for me. Open up the highlights, open up the shadows. Not too, you see how when you open up the shadows too much, now this is just looking bad. Shadows are there for a reason. You want to keep your shadows. You don't have to show detail in every single part of the tonal range. So, you know, right around here looks good, even a little bit more. Adds a nice bit of contrast. Let's drop those highlights just a bit. You don't want it to be too jarring, in my opinion. And then to kind of snap a style into place, I'm going to use one of my color grade presets. I'm just going to drop a link in the description below. These are a collection of presets that I built that utilize color grading. And I'm going to go with this vintage sunrise here. And I just love the way it looks. What I love even more is that with the newer version of presets in Lightroom, you can control the amount. So I'm going to back this off to 0 and just add maybe about 65%. And that to me just, I mean, it does a beautiful job of adding a nice kind of faded, warm look to the image here. I do want to cool the sky off a little bit. So for that, I'm going to go here to the mask mode, select sky, and then I'll go and cool off the color temperature a little bit here, right around there. The other thing that I'm going to do is go back to develop module. Let's add a little bit of clarity. For texture, for this kind of photo, you really kind of want to zoom in and watch what happens. The reason why I say you want to zoom in is because if you don't zoom in, you might start getting this really crunchy look. Same if you remove it, just a little bit, does a nice job there. And then I'll add a little bit of dehaze, which will add even more of that kind of contrast to the sky. Now I might go ahead, go back and open up the white point a little bit. The edits I made make me want to go back and adjust tone a little bit. And that's okay. That's totally okay. You should actually feel comfortable doing that. Just because you're finished with these sliders towards the beginning of your stylization phase of post-processing doesn't mean you can't go back to it. So here, let's go add some vibrance. And this is looking really good yeah, I mean, that's looking really nice. Now, I do get asked whether I would apply sharpening to the photo after the fact if I use sharpen, the sharpen AI model in Topaz Photo AI? And the answer is no. I typically don't, because I don't want to run the risk of over sharpening. It's just one of those things that I'm sensitive about and I try to avoid. So I'm happy with the sharpness of this image right now. I don't need to add any more sharpness. The only other thing I might do is adjust the vignette a little bit, add a little bit stronger of a vignette. The preset that I applied, that vintage sunrise preset, adds a little vignette, but here I think just something like this does a nice job of drawing focus towards the center here. And so that is a different use case for pano stitching, right? Like normally you use pano to get really wide shots, but in this case here, I had a 40mm lens on and I wanted a wider composition, but I did not want to change my lens because of the environmental variables. So being able to put your camera, say, vertically, and even with a longer focal length, if you can even do it in rows. You don't need to do one row. I've done it where I've taken, for example, 4 or 5 images on one row, tilted the camera down a little bit, second row, third row. It'll work. It'll stitch it great. You'll end up with a gigantic photo, but you do get that little bit of added compression that you typically get with longer focal lengths that you lose when you go to kind of the 16 or 18mm side of the focal range. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you are interested in Topaz Photo AI, I'd love it if you click on the link below. It is an affiliate link, so I will get a small percentage of the purchase. It won't affect your price at all. And if you are interested in the color grade presets for Lightroom and Photoshop, I've got that link in the description below. If you want to see my workflow for removing noise from a raw file using Topaz Photo AI, check out this video here. If you liked the video, please hit a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, please do so and click the bell icon so you get notified of all new videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.